through advanced statistical analysis, it was very clear that those who had longer careers playing tackle football were far more likely to develop CTE. And in fact, the risk goes up 30% per year, meaning your odds of developing CTE double every 2.6 years. And so that's the finding from the study. And what the Concussion Legacy Foundation is trying to apply that to is, okay, well, how do you solve that problem? How do you shorten careers to prevent future CTE cases among football players? The logical thing to do would be to start later, because those years when you're young aren't nearly as important or valuable.
Chris, without getting too deep into the weeds, just talk to me about the math and the science and how you came up with those numbers of knowing, because I've watched the entire PSA. It's a terrific job, but actually knowing each year from when you start how much it increases your odds.
So we interview every family member to get their football history. And then, the analysis saying that your risk increases 30% per year is a relatively simple analysis. What we also did, though, was there's always a concern and an awareness that brain bank samples might be biased, right? Not everybody has the same incentive to donate a brain, so you're more likely to get CT cases, or you might be more likely to get people who had longer careers. So we ran some simulations around that, an inverse probability weighting. I got into the weeds there, but the point is that even if people with CT are 50 times more likely to give us their brain, the results still hold. So these results are remarkably robust. The relationship between, there's also just a scientific term called a p-value that helps you appreciate could your finding be due to randomness? Is the fact that each year of football increases your odds of CT random? The odds that this is random are 4 in a billion. This relationship is very real. This might be that evidence we hope can draw a line in the sand for families and say, oh gosh, if I don't want my kid to have CTE, there is a choice I can make: stay and flag longer.
He's wicked smart. Talking to Chris Nowinski, the CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. Chris, the thinking was before, it was really about the number of concussions that you had over the course of your career that led to CTE later in your career. How has that thinking changed?
We've done a 180 on it. When I started this work, and I got my concussions in 2003 when I was a WWE superstar, and I learned about CTE. Everyone talked about concussions being related to CTE, and I was like, darn, I've had a lot of concussions. But the more we look at the data, and now that we have over 500 brains of football players, we can see that there isn't a statistical correlation between the number of concussions they were diagnosed with or the number they think they had and told their family about. But instead, it's a relationship between number of years they play, which is likely a proxy for the thousands of hits to the head they took. And that makes sense. If Ross and I banged heads quite a bit and banged heads against each other in college. If you get hit in the head 1,000 times a year, maybe one of those causes a concussion, but the other 99 are damaging your brain as well. That's the finding that we're all starting to become awake to.
So a couple of things I guess I don't understand, Chris. Some of them I've asked you earlier, but how do we know that it's so bad in particular when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Now, I'm glad I didn't play football till I was 12, but how do we know that it's in particular bad then? And it feels like all the press releases I get, the brains you get are usually always of NFL guys or college guys. Do we have evidence that CTE and significant CTE can come from only youth and high school football?
So when you're using those terms of youth and high school and college, what we're realizing that's really just a proxy for years. So let me flip that for you and just say, instead of saying NFL players, say people who played 15 or more years, which is sort of the average, right? And the question is, if this was smoking and lung cancer, that 15-year plus group, you'd expect to have more cases. And that 1 or 2 year group, you'd expect to have almost no cases of lung cancer, right? We sort of assume that one cigarette isn't causing this. It's the repetition of the act. And that's why this PSA and analogies is helpful in making sense of that. And so if you think about it, smoking and lung cancer, what the curve that we're finding in terms of your risk going up each year is almost overlays the smoking and risk curve. So it all makes sense through the lens of understanding smoking and lung cancer. When we dip down to what's worse about being young, so we have this study that says doesn't matter what level you played or how old you were. Each year appears to be somewhat equally bad, and that risk going up 30% per year. And then we also have studies looking at those who started before 12. If they develop a brain disease, had symptoms earlier. We have another study saying those who started before 12 were more likely to deal with issues like depression and anxiety later on. And the theory there as a neuroscientist, I can tell you, is that when you hit a developing brain over and over again, you're going to change what it becomes, right? You're talking about 86 billion neurons, trillions of delicate connections. Between the ages of 8 and 13, your brain is doing magical things. As your child sort of becomes an adolescent, right? Then the way they think changes. That's because their brain's physically changing. And so it makes sense to me that if you bash a developing brain, you might cause bigger problems down the road. So I would think today, each season when you're younger probably has does more damage, but it may not increase your risk of actually developing CT any worse than any other season later on.
So the new research again says each 2.5 additional years of football played, the odds of developing CTE doubled. Talking to Chris Nowinski, the CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. And Chris, I started playing when I was 8, and I remember it being intense, hitting right away. That's not the football game I see today. The football that's played in my town is with the big bubble practice helmets. They only do hog tackling. It's no head-to-head tackles. If you are thrown out of the game immediately. So a lot of people would say the game is so much safer today. I know this won't happen to my kids. It's so safe. What do you say to them?
That's a great question. What I say is that we don't know the results of this intervention, right? If you play tackle football, you're going to get hit in the head hundreds of times. That's what all the research says. Even with all the modern changes and changing practice and all that, if you cut the number of hits by half, the question is, are you going to significantly diminish CT risk? And now an analogy for this is the smoking industry. Again, when it became very clear that smoking causing lung cancer, the industry said, all right, we'll fix it. We're going to put filters on those cigarettes so not all the bad stuff gets inside. And we're going to lower the tar level. And so there's not as much bad stuff in there. And yet we found out that was still causing lung cancer. And so we sort of abandoned that was a safety change. So there's two ways to think about it. One is that maybe we can be lowering overall risk, but if that relationship of going up 30% per year probably will not change. And so you might shrink where you start, but it's not, you roll in the dice if you start young, because the problem with football is that if you start at 5 and you teach them to love the game and you teach them to be good at the game, they're going to play through at least the end of high school. That's 13 seasons. Our group that had 13 seasons or more was a very high risk group,
So then, Chris, getting back to my question, do you have brains of kids that only played like youth football or high school football that ended up having CT?
Yeah, sorry. We have a handful of who played just youth football. We're nearing 100 who played, who stopped in didn't go beyond high school.
Got it.
And what'd you find in those?
Yeah. So we just find a lower rate of CTE. I mean, that's sort of the finding is that, if you think about your risk going up 30%, or doubling every 2.5 years, they have significantly less CT, in terms of the odds of getting it, but they're still getting CT. We still have CT in teenagers. We still have CT, advanced CT in people in their early 20s. So, I mean, the answer is, if your kid plays, you want to hope that they, the magic of this finding is that if we said, okay, you only can play in high school, you only tackle in high school, 94% of football players would never go on to play after high school. And that group would have a low risk of CT. We don't know what it is, but it would probably be pretty low. And then there would be a small group of people, that 6%, who goes on to, be much more likely to develop CT, but at least they're making a choice there when they're 18 years old or older, and we can feel a little more ethically comfortable with that. So I think that's the solution we all need to sort of, the industry and everyone needs to latch onto, is that football is saved by the fact it's such a dangerous game that adults don't play when they're older for free. We don't strap on a helmet when we're 30 and go play with our buddies on the weekend. And so 94% of people will never play beyond high school, and that will prevent a lot of CT cases.